protesters rallying against the Israel-Hamas war are digging in at the Indiana University Bloomington campus. That despite a heavy police presence and dozens of protesters arrested. Higher education reporter Aubrey Wright joins us from Dunn Meadow, where protesters are continuing to clash with police.
Hey Joe, I'm here at Dunn Meadow. There's about 100 protesters behind me. It's a prayer right now, but they have about 10 tents set up, which is a little bit less than yesterday. Protesters have told me they do expect a police presence today. I was here yesterday, and today protesters seem more energized and organized.
The protesters are with the IU Divestment Coalition, made up of students and faculty. They set up about 15 tents in Dunn Meadow yesterday morning. They want IU to divest from weapons manufacturers as the Israel-Hamas war continues. And they want top leaders, including the IU Bloomington Provost and President Pamela Whitten, to resign.
This institution is integrally complicit in genocide structurally due to the way that it funds and material being sent to arm the genocide.
Hundreds gathered on campus in Dunn Meadow. Before the police came, the group was chanting, making signs, and pitching tents.
I'm not sure why this couldn't have been handled by unarmed individuals simply stating what the rules were and when we were violating them. I can't fathom any situation in which peaceful, very clearly nonviolent demonstrators are to be met with shields and police batons.
Police formed a blockade with their riot shields, giving protesters 5 minutes to clear out their encampment. After neither line budged, the troopers started moving forward, coming head-to-head with the protesters. Troopers threw protesters to the ground and placed them in temporary cuffs. Police tackled some protesters who tried to flee. A few others were dragged from tents, unwilling to leave after the troopers marched forward. 33 people were arrested. Alina Neeson-Thomas was one of those detained.
I was hit in the head by a shield and I believe possibly a gun. It's a little blurry in my mind. It was very fast. I got pulled out by the police by my shoulder, pushed down multiple times and pulled away.
Thomas and other protesters were booked at Monroe County Jail on suspicion of criminal trespass and later released. She says they're banned from campus.
This is our right to assemble and we're advocating for Gaza, and I would say that this won't really, it will damper my personal ability to protest, but really we're here as a whole movement.
The camp at IU follows a national trend of student protesting for Palestine. Across the U.S., students are creating encampments and calling on universities to cut ties with Israel. Many of these protests are also met with arrests and forced removal.
All of these students on all these schools are asserting their power, asserting their voice, and asserting their demands from their university.
Whitten emailed faculty yesterday saying the university protects free exchange of ideas and civil protests. But she says after the university learned about the protests 2 days ago, Provost Rahul Srivastava created an ad hoc committee that changed the policy that has been in place for more than half a century. The new policy says temporary structures, including tents and posters, must be approved in advance. Faculty are protesting the university's decision to change the policy. They reacted to Thursday's protests by staging a protest of their own this morning outside of Bryan Hall.
Because what has happened is such a violation of the most fundamental trust that our students and our families place in us.
Protesters have told me they have no plans to stop anytime soon. Those who were arrested yesterday are not permitted on campus, but that didn't stop some. As for the others, it's unclear if they'll be camping out in Dunn Meadow overnight.
Okay, Aubrey, thanks so much. I know you'll have more online later. Right now, we're joined by Dan Conkle, a professor of law emeritus at IU's Maurer School of Law. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much for being here. So much to talk about. Two-part question I want to start with right away, though. What do you make of the university seemingly changing its free speech policy the night before the event, but also seemingly targeting it to a specific event?
Well, that's the potential problem the university faces from a First Amendment standpoint. The university would be free, if it did so without regard to content, to prospectively impose a rule such as no structures, no tents. The problem here, as your question suggests, is that the university, by the admission of the president, specifically was concerned about this protest, which at least raises the possibility that it could be challenged, that the new policy could be challenged as being based on the viewpoint or the content of the protest, which would be highly problematic. One other problem with the newly adopted last-minute change in policy is that by every indication it does not contain specified criteria for the permitting of such structures, which the new policy purports to permit. The Constitution would require specification of criteria that are not based on content, and it doesn't seem to do that.
So there were nearly 36 arrests yesterday, many given trespass violations, also ordered to stay off campus for a year. Is there any precedent for that?
I don't know if there's precedent for it, but in my view, those trespass notices should be unenforceable. In other words, as to IU affiliated personnel, faculty on the one hand, students on the other, those notices are tantamount to a 1-year suspension, maybe under an unconstitutional law that gives rise to the trespass prosecutions in the first place, without any notice, without any due process. In my view, that is rather plainly unconstitutional. As to unaffiliated, those unaffiliated with IU, these kinds of trespass notices have been done in the past, and they raise much less significant issues.
So we're seeing this unfold across the country at other universities. Are other universities doing similar to IU?
I think to some extent, the University of Texas had a clear out situation with police. I don't know, but in my history at IU for sure, the idea of heavily armed police with assault weapons removing protesters and tents based on, even if it is a violation of a lawful tent policy, to me is truly extraordinary, an overreach by the university, and I hope the decision makers, in fact, can try to defend this based on the claims of safety concerns. Why you would go after tents if there is a serious threat of a safety problem, I think would have to be explained to me. I'm not quite sure how that logic works.
Okay, one more question. So what happens now? Do you expect the trustees to get involved?
I hope they do. They may have already been involved. I don't know whether President Whitten acted on her own, whether this was with the authority and approval of the trustees. I understand that there has been a suggestion that the trustees ought to, in fact, authorize an independent investigation of this episode to see what happened, what the rationale was, and whether or not this type of episode should be prevented in the future. I just walked over here. There are more tents right now in Dunn Meadow. Will the police be back later today to do the same thing? I worry about that.
Professor, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joe.